This video was brought to you by Embedded System Solution, a company composed of like-minded electrical engineers, computer engineers, and computer scientists, and whose main goal is assisting our engineering customers, non-engineering customers, and technician level customers with their electrical and computer engineering level and technician level needs. Our customers range everywhere from engineering students to university professors, technicians to engineers, junior engineers to senior engineers. Please feel free to visit us at www.embeddedSystemSolution.com. Again, www.embeddedSystemSolution.com, or better yet, email us at support@embeddedSystemSolution.com. And like always, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like. Do certain settings, and I'll explain it later, but you got to do certain settings to show the hidden files. And in this case, you're showing the hidden files and hidden folders. It is hidden, and there's a reason why it's hidden. It's because that's where all the repository is. All the files that you actually do the backup of when you do a git commit, that's where they get stored at. So if you delete that folder, basically you lose your version control, your revision, all the history that you have of the application, and you don't want that. So it's hidden, but it's there. And inside of that folder, you have the config file. Again, I don't believe there's a file extension, and so it might be confusing, but it is a file, and just like any file, you can edit it. So in terms of configuring Git, it turns out you're interested in these three files. The Git config file is called a system level file, and then you have the .git config, which is the global level file, and you have the local level Git config file. So those three files are you're interested whenever you want to configure Git. Now, each one has its purpose, but let's just keep going. Just be mindful that those are the files. Now, every single Git project that you have, it's gonna have, obviously under my documents, you can have several of these. So every single Git project is gonna have its own .git and its own config file. So just be mindful of that. So anyways, now let's look at the command line, right, to see how is it that it works. So to see the list of the system files, can you see that right here? And you, by the way, you can open them up in Notepad if you really wanted to. I don't suggest you do that because you could really break it, but you can mess with it, you can see it. But anyways, if you want to use Git instead of using Notepad, use Git to modify them, you can, and this is the command to actually see the files. And so you, as you can tell, you type in git config system, and then you have list, and guess what? It lists all the variables in the file, right? And so let me see this. Yep, there it is. So each one has its function. I'm gonna let you, Google what each one means. Some of them are very important. Some of them you can alter them if you really wanted to, and I'm gonna show you right now how to alter them. And so let's suppose you only wanna see the default branch name, right? So every time, again, if you don't know this, that's fine. We're gonna cover it later on. But every single branch that you create, whenever you create a new repository, you do a git in it. It has a default branch name, and as of right now, like the default branch master name is master. So right here we're running the command to list it. So instead of listing all, the variables, you only want to list the default branch name, right? And so that's the command that you said that it can only list the one that you're interested in. And so let's suppose you're interested in modifying that variable. Well, this is the command. Like you do git config system because you want to make sure you configure it system wide, and you put the name of the variable and the new name, right? In this case, main branch. That's the name that you want to change it to instead of being master branch. So guess what? Now it's called master branch. So you just modified a variable, right? And it's in the, let me see, I forgot. Sorry, it's in the system level, right? And so that's how you modify system level of variables, right? And so let's suppose you want to modify the global variables. As you can imagine, you just type in this command and you can see the list of all the global variables. Obviously, username, that's something that you want to modify, right? Right after you install Git, you definitely want to change the username and the user email. Now, it makes sense, the location of it. I wish you can look at the username and the user email for each user and why it's a global file. Try to try to imagine why the connection of why these three different type of files, configuration files, exist. The global file is because it's the account file, right? For every single account has a global file, and every global file has an account name. And so that's why you have the username. That's why the username gets stored in there. It doesn't make sense for you to put the username variable in the system level file, the git config. It doesn't make sense, because there's several user accounts and everybody has their own name. So there's a specific, hopefully you can visualize why is it that the username gets stored in the global file, and every single account has its global file and it's a different username. So anyways, so change it right there, so that way every single git repository that you make under your account, under your documents, has your username, so that everybody can keep track of, even when you're doing a push to a remote repository. That's very important, so people can know who's making the pushes. And again, you want to put your email that way. If the collaboration between engineers, like multiple users that are collaborating, multiple collaborators, they know how to reach out. If you make a specific push and they don't agree with it or they have questions with it, that's how they know how to reach out to you. And again, think about it as to why it's global. Think of those username and user email, and then it'll make sense. So that's why you have different configuration files. And again, at the very end, again, to configure it, to change it, let's suppose you only want to list, instead of listing all of them, you want the username. So I guess, of course, you run the git config global, and then you put the user email, and that gives you exactly the user email, right? What's stored in, instead of listing all the variables. And if you want to configure it, as you can imagine, you run the same command, but the only thing is you add something at the end. Now, I made a boo-boo right here. So instead of support@embeddedsystems.com, I changed it to Emilio Zapata. That's not an email, right? So I made a boo-boo. So just pretend it's Emilio Zapata at embeddedsystemsolution.com. So I'm sorry. I made a boo-boo, and I realized afterwards, like, but anyways, forgive me. So I continue on with this. If you want to list just the user email variable, as you can tell, you run the command again, and now you have Emilio Zapata. But again, it doesn't make sense, because now every time I do a push, people are just going to see, for email, they're going to see Emilio Zapata, so they don't know who to email if they have questions on it. So I have to run that command again and change that name. But just be mindful of it. So that's the method that the commands that you use to change the global files, the variables within the global file. So anyways, just be mindful. And again, and at the end, of course, you have the local file, the local git config files. So every single project that you create is going to have a config file. Every single one is going to have a local config file. And this command, as you will see, let me see, I don't want to get ahead of myself, right? Let me see. Crap. Okay. So I realized another mistake. I'm sorry. So right there, if you notice in the path, in the file path, I'm under users, Emilio Zapata, documents. And instead of git status, the command that I really wanted to run was git config local list. And unfortunately, I put git status. But that command is not going to run, right? And so that command, you have to be, in terms of the path, you have to cd, change directory. You have to be in the directory where your project folder is at, where your git project folder is at. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So every single project folder that you have, it creates this file, the config file. I'm sorry, this one's like... So anyways, so you must cd into your project folder. So just pretend it's the git file, but more or less you get a zero error that, hey, you can't list something. So the git config local list, that command, you have to be in the directory. When you're using the command line, you have to be in the directory where your git project is at. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And every single git project has his local level config file, git config file. So just be aware of that. And of course, right there's some of the variables that you can have. Those variables names are specific to the project. So again, so hopefully all this makes sense, right? And so sometimes you have an overlapping where the system level, the global level, and the local level, they have the same variable name, the same variable name, And you might think, well, which one is the one that dominates? Well, it turns out the local one is the one that dominates. So the local will always trump global, and the global will always trump the system level, right? And but theoretically speaking, you shouldn't have overlapping. But if in case you do, the system level, that's what, if the variables happen to have the same name on the same three files, the one that's on the top is the one that trumps the one in the bottom. So we're like federal, state, and city. Federal trumps state, and state trumps city. So it's kind of the same thing, but in this case, federal would be local, global would be state, and system is city. So anyways, those are the three files that you have to edit, change to properly config Git, and that's the location of where you can find all these files. Don't start using Git without configuring these files. At least look at the variables inside of it, and at least change the username and the branch name maybe, and the user email. Definitely, and you can even add stuff to it. But just make sure to add those, because otherwise, you want people knowing stuff about you, and at the same time, you might want to change the default branch name. So anyways, I think that's it. Yeah. So thank you, and bye.